Well, here we all are again. Welcome to my living room and welcome to the 1830 service online. I didn't think we would be back here so soon, but here we are, lockdown 2.0. And this time I am happy that at least we get takeaway coffee from the get-go, keeping me going. We have been thinking about our brand new vision series at the 1830. A couple of weeks ago, we launched this new vision, following Jesus by looking up, leaning in, and living out the gospel story together. And the next 3 months, we're focusing on each one of those three elements of looking up, leaning in, and living out. And this month, we are looking at looking up. So before I kick off tonight with what I want to share with you, we've got a couple of people from our 1830 service who just want to share what God has been doing in their life recently and how He has been encouraging them to look up.
Hello. So when Emma mentioned that we'd be kicking off this new series, the 1830 with Look Up, I was absolutely blown away because it's something that God's spoken to me about really clearly before. At the start of last year, I'd just gotten back from studying for a semester in London, and I was really struggling with that transition back home and with missing relationships that I'd forged over there. And I was going through some things I brought back with me and found this postcard that I'd picked up at the HTV cafe. And on the front it said "Keep looking up" with this drawing of a swallow, and on the back was a beautiful poem that goes, "Soot clouds, heavy thoughts like wild wolves overhead, but you say look higher. Greyness gives way to blue open space. Wisdom whispers, keep the gaze high." And in that moment I was just absolutely comforted by the fact that I was under the exact same sky I'd been under when I was in London, and I was following the exact same God that had been pursuing me while I was in London. And funnily enough, it was that process of continuing to look up and continuing to seek Him that actually led me to be in this community here at St. Paul's. And recently I've been feeling Him say a similar thing in a different way, just highlighting the importance of looking beyond the greyness of our circumstances and into His blue open space. Just as Johnny was sharing in the morning service a couple of weeks ago about the dynamic triangle of faith, that we are called to look beyond the tyranny and the chaos of our circumstances and into divine purpose and into God's direction. And I was praying the other night about this idea of looking up, and I had this image of us standing in this strong current like a river crashing against our back and taking things from us. And then in contrast to that, this image of Jesus walking towards us against the current and returning to us things that the flow had taken. So returning to us our purpose, our worth, our hope, our peace. And it was just this beautiful picture of the way in which Jesus contradicts the way of the world, and that in keeping our eyes fixed on Him and looking up and beyond the chaos of what's going on around us, we can stay grounded in our identities in Him. And yeah, it's just all been super timely considering that we'd be coming back into lockdown. So wherever you are today, whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, I really hope that serves as a huge encouragement to you.
Hi, my name's David. I've been coming to St. Paul's for about 7 years. You've probably seen me at some of the 1830 services because for most of that time I've been really involved playing the drums as part of the worship team. Recently I've been learning a lot about hearing from God and listening to His voice. I went to the Hearing from God course a few weeks ago, and it was so helpful and encouraging to learn that there are so many different ways that He speaks to us, and it really helped me understand that some of the experiences I've had are actually Him communicating with me. We talked about a few main ways that God talks to us, and two of those really resonated with me. One of them was seeing and one of them was feeling. With seeing, I learned that sometimes God gives me pictures, and it's super encouraging, but at the same time the challenge I think for me around that is to not just leave that to a Sunday service or a prayer meeting when we're all together, but that I can actually tune into what He's saying 24/7 in my day-to-day life. And the other way with feeling is when I'm playing on the drums, when I'm worshipping on the drums, I feel a sense of God with me, and I feel a sense of what He wants me to play or how He wants me to play it. And I think, yeah, it's super encouraging just to know that I can look up constantly because he's constantly talking to us, and it's really just about learning how to listen.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruby and I'm going to be talking to you about how God has been challenging me and encouraging me to look up lately. Life has been kind of hectic. I've just recently moved back to New Zealand and I've moved into a hall of residency to start university. Alongside all of this, COVID has been going on, so it's provided quite the hectic experience. But however, during this time, I do feel like God has provided a lot of opportunities for me and opened a lot of doors for me at the same time. This at times has been a bit overwhelming and has left me a bit unsure about which paths to take and where he's leading me. So when Emma proposed the series of Looking Up, it really struck a chord with me, and I took what she said quite literally, like I do most things in life, and just turned it into a normal physical attribution that I contributed to my everyday life. So anytime I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit unsure, I find myself physically just glancing up to the sky and reminding myself that there is a God that is bigger than me and is bigger than all my fears and concerns and has a purpose for me and a plan for my life. And just by physically just taking myself out of my mental state and looking up, I find myself feeling a lot more comforted and reminded of what my purpose is and who I am doing what I am doing for. So I challenge you guys all as well to just take a second and physically look up. It really does provide quite a bit of comfort.
Thanks so much, guys. It's so great and encouraging to hear stories of how God is speaking and working in the lives of people in our community. I can't wait to kind of hear more of these as they come up. So tonight we are going to continue with looking up, and so far we've already looked at identity and Jesus. And the main reason for us starting with looking up is that our vision is obviously about following Jesus. And so we're modeling that, go figure, on the life of Jesus. And what we see in Jesus's life from the very beginning of his ministry is that it all starts with looking up at the Father. So when he is baptized and comes out of the water, a voice from heaven descends and says, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I'm well pleased." So Jesus' identity is confirmed from above, from the very beginning. And from that moment on, he teaches us how to look up. When he teaches the disciples to pray, he says, start with our Father in heaven. And when he tells them not to worry, he says, seek first the kingdom, and all of these things will be added. And the greatest commandment, he tells us, is love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength. So consistently, Jesus is teaching us, go to the Father first. And so that is why we are starting with looking up. But lockdown tends to be a time that kind of comes in and just derails things, takes things off course. And if you're anything like me, find it a kind of bit of a, takes me aback a little bit and takes me a while to kind of get back on track. And I think lockdown can really stop us from looking up in lots of ways. And I kind of just want to focus on a few of the things tonight that stop us looking up. And the first one of those things is just distraction. That might look different for each one of us, but just even things like our phones or family commitments or Netflix or work or day-to-day life, we're just juggling so many different things all the time. And it can be so easy, even when our calendars are kind of emptied, to have things put back in like Zoom calls and meetings. And suddenly we just feel like our lives are full again and there's no time for God. And one of those kind of big distractions, I feel like at the moment, is the news. The daily updates of what is happening around the world with COVID-19, Jacinda's updates each day. It's like we're constantly getting bombarded with bad news, with kind of negative things happening. And that can then lead us to become more introspective, particularly if you're an introvert or you're an overthinker like me, you end up just internalizing all of these thoughts, and it just becomes like, what's going to happen to the world? What's going to happen to the economy? How will this affect me? What's this going to be like? Oh, I feel really down. And we kind of end up in this pit of self-focusedness. And I think all of those things end up pulling us away from God and lead to a lack of hope. Hope is one of those universal concepts that everyone believes is essential. And I was actually listening to a webinar earlier this week about coaching and people who are in counselling or therapeutic roles. And they were talking about the importance of hope and how when we don't have hope, it's almost like it's kind of game over. And actually, the less hope we have, the more our mental health tends to decrease, the more we stop looking after ourselves, and it has quite catastrophic results for us. So we're all kind of agreed that we need hope. And I want to ask you this evening, where is your level of hope at the moment? If you were to think about a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being I have absolutely zero hope, and 10 being like I am the most hopeful, I believe that anything could happen. Where would you be right now? And we talk a lot about hope, don't we? Hope you have a good day. Hope that meeting goes well. I'm really hopeful we're going to be in level 2 next week. And we use it as a kind of throwaway word. And when we use it, we're often just wishful thinking or being optimistic. And I'm a big fan of optimism. I think optimism is fantastic and positive people are great to be around. But the difficulty is what happens when our optimism is just based on circumstantial things. What happens when we see thousands of people being affected around the world by war and the explosion in Beirut and COVID-19, or people lose their jobs or their income or their houses, or we see economies go into a recession? When our hope is based on optimism, it is constantly under threat. And so, what is the alternative? How do we avoid living in this place of constantly feeling like our hope is going to be robbed? Well, I think that actually Jesus gives us the answer. When we look in the Bible, we see a different model of hope, biblical hope. And I want to talk about the three key differences that I see from biblical hope to worldly hope. So there's so many ways that hope in the Bible differs to hope in the world. But the three main ones I want to focus on are that it is unseen, that it requires faith, and that it is firm and secure. So biblical hope is unseen. And in Romans 8:24, it tells us that hope that is seen is no hope at all. For who hopes for what they already have? It's a fair point. And it tells us that hope is actually about looking forward. It's about the future. And it's not about our current circumstances. We won't always be able to see hope around us. Actually, we have to look beyond what is in order to see heaven's perspective. And in my team, people will know that one of my most annoying phrases that I just hate is the phrase, it is what it is. It is what it is. I absolutely hate that phrase. And it's because it feels so unhopeful. It feels defeatist. And it is basically accepting the present reality and saying, well, that's just how things are. We can't do anything about them. And although I don't deny present circumstances, I really believe that actually we need to look beyond what is. That is what we're called to do as Christians. We're called to seek God's perspective on things. And so it isn't always what it is. There's always more to be seen. There's always more that could shift or change. And secondly, as well as being unseen, hope in the Bible requires faith. So we all know the well-known verse from Hebrews 11, verse 1, that talks about faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. Actually, it requires quite a lot of boldness and quite a lot of trust in order to have the kind of hope that we're called to in the Bible. And the only way that we can do that, the only way that we can have that faith, is because we know we're not trusting in our circumstances. We're not trusting in things that can constantly flex and change. We're trusting in a person, in the person of Jesus, who never changes. And so the third thing is that hope is firm and secure. Because our hope is in Jesus, we're told we have this hope is like an anchor for the soul, which I love, because when you think about throwing an anchor from a ship down into the sea, it means the boat can rock, but it stays firm. It doesn't drift out to sea. And I think at times like this, in the middle of lockdown, in the middle of the world being caught up in COVID-19, it can feel a little bit like our ship is like this and we're at risk of going out to sea. But actually, the Bible tells us that we can stand firm because our hope is anchored in something that is fixed and secure. So if that is how biblical hope differs to worldly hope, what are we meant to do next? What do we do with that? And I think what Jesus is calling us always to do is to fix our eyes on him. And we've talked a lot about storms recently in a number of sermons at St. Paul's. And one of the stories that I love in the Bible is when Jesus calls Peter to step out of the boat and to come towards him. And Peter says, "I'll only come out of the boat if you call me." And so Jesus tells him to come, and Peter starts to walk. But then Peter notices the waves and the wind, and he becomes afraid and starts to sink. And I love this story because actually I've had a very similar experience, not of walking on water. Nope, although maybe in the future, who knows. But when I learnt to, I'm going to say windsurf, but I'm going to get that wrong. Water ski. I've had one lesson water skiing back in the UK. And one of the things that God taught me through water skiing is that you don't actually have to try. And the more you try, the worse at it you are. So you have to kind of like put your hands up on the kind of handlebars and just like lift yourself up and not try too hard. That took me quite a few attempts because I'm very strong-willed and I wanted to do it myself. Anyway, once I got up, the next thing that the instructor said to me was, you have to fix your eyes on this point on the boat and just keep looking up at that point in the boat. And I was like, right, okay. So I was looking up, I was like trying to focus, and I started going quite fast and I was like, oh, okay, this is quite fun. And I turned a corner and I was like, oh my goodness, how's this going to go? But he was like, keep looking up, keep looking up. So I did. I was holding on, went round the corner. It went really well. And I was like, oh my gosh, can't believe I just nailed that corner. And then what happened was the wake started to come. And so it started to get quite choppy on the water. And I could feel the kind of waves and I could feel myself going up and down. And I looked from that fixed point and I looked down at the waves and started to freak out because they were quite big. And as soon as I did that, I lost my balance and I just fell in the water. And the instructor said to me, you didn't have your eyes up. And I felt like God really taught me something that day in a similar way to how he taught Peter, that actually when we look at our circumstances around us, instead of focusing our eyes on him, we fall in. And there's a reason he tells us to fix our eyes on him. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is to constantly be looking up and not around. So I want to come back to that first question I asked about, where is your level of hope at the moment? Where was it on that scale of 0 to 10? And there's a guy called Steve Backlund, and he has this ministries called Igniting Hope Ministries. And he says that hope is like a bit of a barometer. The more hopeful we are, the more truth we're believing. the less hopeful we are, the more lies we're believing. So have a think about what your number is. How much truth from God are you believing about yourself, about your circumstances at the moment? And how many lies of the enemy, maybe through the news, maybe through what you're seeing around you, how many lies are creeping in and dashing your hope? What are you putting your hope in at the moment? Is it firm and secure? One of the ways that I'm finding it most helpful at the moment to remind myself to connect with God, which I have to say I'm finding quite hard in this time, is to ask God a question. And Sally actually spoke about this, or was it Lou, on the Hearing from God course recently. They said, actually, just ask God questions. He loves to chat with us and give us answers. And so one of the questions I ask God is, what do you want to say to me today? And I often find I get out my journal and I write that down. And the first thing that pops into my head, I just write. And a couple of times recently, God has given me the phrase, look up, child. Look up, child. And I recently came across the Lauren Daigle song that is actually called Look Up, Child. And so I've asked James and Antonia to put together their own rendition of that song. And it is beautiful. And they are going to play us out tonight with that song as a reminder to keep looking up despite our circumstances. So I'm praying that you guys will be having a good week this week.
Where are you now when darkness seems to win? Where are you now when the world